Jailing Kennedy, Act 3 Scene 1 Part 1. During Scene 1, Benvolio and Mercutio are introduced in Verona. They are out on a bright day when they come across some catapults and exchange insults. The characters Romeo and Tybalt are brought into the scene both verbally, the Capulets, and previous characters talking about them, and physically, as they enter the area where the fight was brought up the street. Tybalt enters mad and fuming and goes immediately to brawl with Romeo. At the same time, Romeo tries to stay calm and Benvolio reminds Tybalt of the threat placed upon them by the prince if the families would continue to clash. In this part of the sense, Romeo chooses to try to avoid fighting Tybalt, showing how Romeo isn't a violent kid and giving the reader a sense of hope in his destiny. Olivia Smith, Act 3, Scene 1, Part 2. Continuing off what Jailing said, Tybalt continues to try and rile up Romeo into a battle, as Romeo continues to decline and try and calm him. The thought of him being Tybalt's family, as him being the husband of Juliet, stirs in the back of his mind, and he says, "But love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love," saying he loves Tybalt, but cannot give an explanation on why. Mercutio was feeling confused and broke into a fight with Tybalt, who was still on a rampage for battle, and as Benvolio held Tybalt back, he flung his sword through Romeo's arm and side off his chest, missing him, but piercing the one Romeo held back's flesh, Mercutio. As Mercutio takes his dying breaths, he curings the houses of Montague and Capulet, claiming the rivalry houses to be plagues, foreshadowing to the fact that was going to happen to the young lovers, them being from both houses, and it wasn't long before the bad thing happened. Bryson Hatfield, Act 3, Scene 1, Final Part. Finishing off the scene, we see how Romeo shows his rage and guilt, loving the one from the Capulet house, Juliet. He challenges Tybalt to a death match, and he accepted. They fought and Romeo came out to be the successor, and Benvolio urged him to run, as he put to death by the prince if he were caught. Finishing up, the prince shows up to the scene with Romeo no longer being there, and with Benvolio filling him in with the previous event. The prince thought it would be fair just to banish Romeo, as it was a life for a life, and it seemed fair for the circumstances. Colton Mediterranean, Act 3, Scene 2. As we leave the previous events from Scene I, a new setting shows the Capulet orchard. Juliet is the one awaiting her love's arrival, and then the nurse rushes to the girl with the news of thinking Romeo's is dead. Quickly after this conflict in information, the nurse explains the reality in the situation, with the killing of Tybalt by Romeo's hand. At first, Juliet is cruel at the thought of Romeo at first, but then defends him to the nurse. Juliet then expresses her regret about the fact that she will not spend her wedding night with Romeo, and then the nurse goes on to say she'll find him for Juliet. With this, Juliet offers her ring to the nurse, so she'll give it to Romeo, and the last line of the scene gives the information that Juliet thinks this meet-up with Romeo will be their last, mainly because she said bid him come to take his last farewell.
Aubrey Fritz, Scene 3, Act 3.
Scene 3, Act 3 takes place in Friar Lawrence's cell. Romeo had been hiding from the prince the night before, scared he would be executed for killing Tybalt in Scene 1, Act 3. Romeo is sorrowful because he's banned from Verona. Romeo isn't very motivated due to him being sad and scared to leave Verona and leave his wife, Juliet. His mood is very clear in the beginning of Scene 3. He's regretful because he feels like a murderer, although he did choose to kill Tybalt. Romeo feels as if leaving Juliet would be worse than death itself. The nurse brought Romeo a ring from his delightful wife. This ring appears to cheer him up. "How well my comfort is revived by this," said Romeo. Romeo is told to go to Mantua, where he can spread the word of his and Juliet's marriage that he hopes would be pardoned by the prince and he would be able to come back to Verona.
Act 3, Scene 4, Reese finale.
In Scene 4, the setting changes to a room in the Capulet house. There is a conversation going between two new characters, Lady Capulet and Paris. The two are having a conversation about Juliet. As Paris continues on about wanting to marry Juliet, but slowly accepts that it wouldn't be for a while, he began to take his leave. However, Lady Capulet says how Juliet had been in mourning of Tybalt's death. However, as readers, we know that she is really mourning the loss of Romeo's presence. With Lady Capulet, not knowing this, she thinks if she were to get married, it may benefit her well-being, so they come to the conclusion to have a wedding the following week. Number Duo, Act 3, Scene 5. As this scene opens, we see the two lovers have met up in the setting of the Catapult house. The time of the scene gives the fact that the sun will be rising soon, so as Romeo tries to take his leave, Juliet begs him to stay. As Romeo explains that if he were to stay, he'd be put to death, her mood quickly changes from sadness because of Romeo leaving to a sense of urgency on getting her husband away. When he leaves, Lady Capulet enters and explains the plan to have her marry Paris. Thinking Juliet would be happy, she is surprised with the reaction of shock and denial, and her father, Lord Capulet, threatens to disown her if she were not to marry Paris. Finishing off the scene, we see how Juliet wants to go pray, and informing the nurse she is taking her leave. However, she is going to try to reunite with Romeo by taking her own life.